Hey there, eighth graders. It's Mr. Batts. I have my assistants here. There's Hayes and Peyton. They're here because they're here all the time. Listen, we're going to do Chapter 10, Section 3 notes. You do not have to write them down. I'm going to try to make this as short as possible, 5 to 10 minutes. Like I said, you don't have to write the notes down. I will send the notes to you. When I send a reminder in an email today, I just wanted to try to keep this as normal as possible instead of talking to my daughter's dolls and my son's wrestling toys because we're all getting a little stir crazy. And so I thought the best way would be to put my giant head in a corner and try to keep this as normal as possible. I know that we're missing school. I know that you are all missing terrible dad jokes. What did the drummer name his two twin daughters? Anna 1, Anna 2. All right, but anyway, so real quick, I'm going to go through Chapter 10, Section 3. We're talking about the 1920s and a lot of similarities to the 2020s. In 1918, what we call the Spanish flu started, and upwards of 50 million people died. Now, obviously, that's not a scenario we're looking for the coronavirus now because we have better idea of social distancing and hand washing. Wash your hands, stay away from other people, everything else. The Spanish flu, of course, originated in Kansas, not Spain. They called it the Spanish flu because Spain was not involved in World War I, and so they weren't churning out war propaganda, which we talked about in the last chapter. And so they were really the first country and the only country for the longest time that was like saying, hey, there's this flu going out. And so other people around the world were like, oh, well, it must be a Spanish problem. And so that's why we call it the Spanish flu. So anyway, we're talking, and then at the end of the 1920s, of course, we get into the Great Depression. Of course, unemployment is a big issue right now, affecting a lot of people. Hopefully we fix that sooner rather than later. And so a lot of the stuff that we're talking about has a lot of relevance to what's going on today. And so after World War I, there was a recession, economic downturn. A little bit is called a recession. When it gets really bad, it's called a depression. We're in a recession right now. We're trying to keep it to a recession instead of full-blown depression, of course. But then through the 1920s, we began a steady growth that lasted until the very end, October of 1920, in fact. And the comparison I always use is it's like, the first hill of a roller coaster, up and up and up and up and up. And people thought it was going to go up forever. But then, of course, during the 1930s and the end of 1929, things dropped off quite a bit. One of the biggest contributing factors was of the availability of electricity. We got to where we could produce, outlets in people's houses, and we can run factories on electricity without steam power or without some lady with giant calves, pumping pedal on a loom day and night. And so now, by the end of the 1920s, 70% of America's factories had electricity, as opposed to 30 at the end of World War II, or at the beginning of World War II, I should say. And so, of course, that's a big growth, and that contributes to a lot of different things. Also, people started to not treat their workers as disposable commodities. In other words, people that got chopped up and ground up and burned up in factories. Because of the growth of unions and stuff, people started to be like, hey, maybe if we don't treat our workers like garbage, they will work harder. And what a crazy idea. It actually worked. And so we'll talk about in just a second. Henry Ford started, paying his workers $5 a day, which of course now is less than a minimum wage per hour. But back then was quite a big amount of money for people that worked back then. And so mass production, of course, became a big thing. Mass production is always a lot simpler than what you think. It's not putting a tire on one car. It's actually just screwing one lug nut onto one tire of one car. And so it really divides the work up so small that pretty much anybody can do one job. Electricity started getting into the American homes. Of course, we have electricity now, but before the 1920s, that was a very iffy thing. I had an aunt growing up that did not have running water or electricity. It was weird, but that's a very uncommon thing now. Installment buying, credit cards, basically. Um, and there are good things. If you go and you don't have to pay all the cash up front. We buy houses and cars with that all the time. But whenever you're buying your everyday things, they can get you in a lot of trouble. I had people that I went to college with that were left college. They were $10,000 into debt. The thing about it is you have to realize you pay interest back, and so you don't want to run up credit card debt right off the bat when you turn 18. When you turn 18, you're going to start getting those in the mail every single day of your life. And so there are good things and bad things. You can buy things and pay them back in small installments instead of all at once. But also, you can buy things that you can't afford, and you can also get into crippling debt. The automobile was the biggest industry at the time. America ran on cars for decades after this. The economy revolved around the automobile. 4 million Americans worked for auto companies or in related jobs, making roads, gas station attendants, stuff like that, things that are related to the car. Henry Ford, of course, is the most famous, pretty much a Nazi sympathizer. We'll talk about that later when we get into World War II. But he did pay his workers $5 a day, which, like I said, most factory work, which we talked about chapters behind, back in chapter 7, 8, 9, was $1 a day. And so this is $5 a day. And so that is, I know this isn't math class, but that's a lot more money. And so people could buy things like rent and food, which was, a big thing. And so now America fell in love with driving. And so this gas stations, rest stops, tourist destinations, things like that, rubber for tires, steel for the chassis of the car, glass for windshields. And people drove just for fun. And this is really an American thing. In a lot of other countries, the idea of like, hey, we're going on a road trip is not really a thing. But that was part of the American dream. People could go where they want, when they want. They could travel, and the car really made that a popular destination. Farmers could not compete because of the ability to ship things faster, we didn't need as many farms, because if you grew corn in Illinois, you could now buy that corn produced in Illinois in California, and you could ship that in a day or two, and we had to worry about food going bad. And so localized farming became less and less important. And so there were more farmers, but Americans aren't going to need more food. You're not going to be like, well, I'm going to eat 6 bushels of corn today instead of just one piece of corn, because Farmer Joe needs to spend his money. People are only going to eat what they're going to eat. And so this really impacted farmers negatively. There's not enough people to buy their food. The demand's still the same, but the supply is going up and up and up. And so this is really, we could ship food in from other countries or other continents, even Europe. And so railroad, still that word, workers and coal miners, they had difficult times too. Cottons, people started to buy synthetic fabrics like this sweet Under Armour shirt I have on. And so not everybody was caught up in this economic boom at this time. Things were not going great for everybody. But of course, pretty soon at the end of the 1920s, things were going to be not great for everybody. And that's the Great Depression, which is the next chapter. So anyway, we're about 8 minutes in. We're going to cut it. That's the end of the notes. I will send the notes. I will send a little reading check home today. Just do your best and turn it in Google Classroom. And comment in the comments if you just want to say hello. If you are losing your minds being at home with your family and just want to say hi to me or say hi to your classmates, that'd be great. But keep it appropriate. Of course, your name's logged in. And I'll see you guys later on. Bye.